welcome to Sew Bliss. Today I'm going to show you how to bind this quilt. So let's get started. Our first step to making a binding is going to be measuring around our quilts or whatever you're making to figure out how long we need the binding to be. So I just measured all the way around mine and I got 175 in inches. So once I have the size of my quilt figured out, I can start cutting out my binding. So here I have my binding fabric and a rotary cutter and my ruler. And my binding, I'm going to cut it 2.5 inches wide. I'm just going to line up my ruler to 2.5 inches and cut it. When you're cutting out all of your strips, make sure you actually cut out a little more than you actually need. So I have about 175 inches around my quilt that I need to cover, but I'm going to cut out more than that because when we piece them together, we're going to be laying them on top of each other like this and sewing a diagonal. So that's actually taking off a little bit. So now I'm going to take these two strips over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this diagonal right here. If you want to, you can mark it with a marking pencil or a pen or anything that you have. You could also just mark it with pins right across here from this point to this point and just sew that diagonal. So here I have mine marked and ready to go, and I'm just going to sew all along that line. Once I have mine sewn right along here, I'm going to cut this triangle off at about 1/4 inch. And once I've cut that off, I can open it up and you can see that it makes a nice long strip, and that's what we're going to do with all of our pieces. But first I'm going to iron this little flap open, and that way we have a nice clean binding that will lay flat. So now I will just start attaching all of my other pieces together, making one very long strip of binding. Once you're done sewing all your strips together, you're going to have a really long piece, kind of like this jumbled mess over here. And all I'm doing now is I have it laying on my ironing board, and I've ironed all of these seams that we trimmed earlier. And now I'm just ironing it again like this. I'm just folding the two edges to the inside so they meet in the middle, and each edge is the same. So if you want to measure it, you can, but if not, you can just fold them together and make sure they look similar in size. And I'm going to iron that down, and I've just pinned mine with some pins to hold it in place while I do the rest of it. So I'm just going to do that all the way down all of this. Once my whole strip is ironed like this, I can now start pinning it to my quilt. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to open it up, and on one edge you're going to start in the middle and leave a tail of your binding. And so I've just started pinning, and it's going to be right sides together. I've just opened my piece up and placed it right on the edge of my quilt. So right here, just like this. And we're going to sew at 1/2 inch, and that should be about where that crease line is that you made with the iron. And if it's not, make sure that you're staying at 1/2 inch and not just following that line. And we're going to go all the way down, and once I get to the corner, I will show you what we will do for the corner. Just stop 6 inches, about 6 inches before the corner. Now when you get to the corner, you're going to keep pinning all the way across, and you're going to mark on your fabric where 1/2 inch is from the top down and from the side over. So right here I have where my 1/2 inch mark is from the top down and from the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my fabric all the way over here, and I'm going to watch this white line I have here, and I'm just going to pin that straight down. So that way when I go to sew, I will sew all the way over until I hit this pin, and then when I hit the pin, I will stop sewing and take my needle out and cut my threads, and then we will come back and start the other side. Once I've come all the way over to the 1/2 inch mark, I'm going to pin the top part right here, so that way my fabric stays all the way to this edge, and then I'm going to take it and curve it so that it will come down onto the other edge. And I'm going to take another needle, and I'm going to find where I marked the 1/2 inch to the side. So I have it right there. So I'm going to pin that down. And when I'm pinning, so I just pinned that down. And when I'm pinning, I'm going to make sure I don't catch any of this fabric in here. That we're actually going to leave in there. So that way when we fold it over, I'll show you. So that way when we fold it over, it's going to create this nice little mitered corner, just like that. When you go to sew again, you're going to feel the fabric underneath right where you ended. So you can see it on that side right there, and I can feel it right here. So I'm going to start right there. I'm not going to catch any of this fabric underneath. I'm just catching this fabric that we have, and I'm just going to start stitching all the way down, and then I'm just going to keep going all the way around the quilt. And I will do that on every corner. I'll stop, cut my threads, readjust, and keep sewing all the way around. Now when you come to the end of the quilt, you're going to have these 2 extra flaps left over. This is what I just finished, and this is what we started with at the beginning. We need to piece them together like we did the other pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold them so that I know exactly how much I need. So I'm going to take my pen. You could use a marking pencil. Definitely make sure it's not going to be seen if you're using a pen. And I'm going to mark the inside right in here, and then right in here, and right in here, and right in here. So that way I know exactly where it needs to line up, and I can match those. So first I'm going to lay this piece out here, and I'm going to bring my other piece and lay it over the top of it, and I'm going to match this top notch with the bottom notch on this one. So when I find them, I'll just match them up like that. So they're making almost like an L. And once I've got those pinned in place, I'm going to bring this line across here and match it with the notch on the back of this one. So that's the top notch on the back piece. And I will pin that in place as well. So now I can make this top piece lay flat. And it might be a little difficult, but just play with it for a minute and it should work. So now I can draw my diagonal from this corner to this corner, and that is where I'm going to sew across right there. And before you cut all the excess off, you want to make sure that it's actually going to fit on your quilt and you don't need to re-sew it. So make sure you do that before you actually sew. So first I'm going to make my diagonal, and now I'm ready to go sew this diagonal piece right here. After you have sewn the diagonal, then you can check and see if it will lay flat. So I just took all my pins out and I'm going to turn it under and just see how it lays, because I'm next going to sew that down. And it looks like mine's actually going to lay pretty nicely. So I'm going to leave it how it is. There's no bubbling or even too much. So that would be like a pleat or a tuck. So just check yours and see how it is. You might have to redo the stitching. But next I am just going to cut my ends off so we don't have all this excess fabric. And after I have done that, I can then sew along here. I might want to iron this down first, but then I can sew along here and close that up, and then we can get ready to sew on the other side. Once we're done sewing this side down, we can go on to the other side and sew the binding onto that side. So what we're going to do is, because we had creased it earlier with the iron, it will fold nicely and it's just going to fold down just like that. Now I'm going to sew mine by hand, and I'm going to show you how to do that. If you don't want to sew it by hand and you want a lot quicker way to do it, all you have to do is put it down and take your pins and pin it in place, and you can just stitch right along here. You could either do a stitch in the ditch, or you could just stitch right along and you'll have a stitch right here on the binding and it will show up on the other side. Just make sure you're actually coming onto the binding on the other side and not on to this fabric, or that might look funny. There are a couple options to do with the machine, but I'm going to show you how to do it by hand. And it's going to look a lot cleaner and nicer, and there won't be any threads that will be seen. So all you're going to need is a needle and thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start over here, and I'm just going to take a piece out of my quilt, and I'm not going through to the other side. I'm just taking a little chunk, and you can't even see it on this side. And I'm just taking that chunk, and it's right where the stitching is from when we sewed it on the other side of the quilt. And I'm just going to pull all the way through until I hit my knot. And then I'll have this fold over just like this. And I'm going to come up here. And on the very edge, I'm going to take a stitch through it. And I'm just going through, so it's in this kind of almost tunnel. And I'm just going through that. And I'm just going to take about a 1/4 inch stitch, pull through, and then tighten it. So that'll pull it down just like that. And this is called a slip stitch. If you've seen a few of my other videos, I've done this stitch before. I just really like how it is so clean and it hides all of the stitching. So then I'm going to take another stitch right where my stitching is, and that will cover up the stitching. It'll make the binding pull down right on top of the stitching. And I'll just pull it down like that. And then I'll go back in and take another stitch in it. And I'm not going through the fabric. I'm just going into almost like a tunnel and pulling through and tightening that. So you'll see it just pulls it down very nicely. And if you want, you can come a few threads out from where your stitches were from the other side. So that way you know it's completely covered. And just take a little stitch, and I'm not going through the other side, you can't see it at all, and pulling through and tightening right there. And I'll just do this all the way around my quilt, and it might take some time, but once you get the hang of it, it actually goes pretty quickly. If you just sit down in front of a movie or something, if you can multitask like that, then you can just do it pretty quickly, and it doesn't take too much thought, and you don't have to like worry about it. You can just keep sewing as you go. So I'm going to do this all the way around my quilt and sew that binding on. When you get to the corner, what you're going to do is you're going to tuck part of it under and then just bring it over, just kind of the way it looks on the other side, just so we have that line and that little tuck right there. So I'm going to just play with it for a minute and try and get it the way I like on this side. So once I get it the way I like it, I'll just hold it in place. You could also pin it in place, and I'm just going to slip stitch along here and then up into here. And there I have my corner sewn. So I'm just going to do that exact same thing for every corner as I go around the entire quilt. After you are done sewing all around the edges of your quilt, you are then done with the binding. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to stay tuned for more videos. Make sure to like and to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!